Welcome to Sustainability Now, an exploration of technologies and paradigms to shape a world that works. Designed for socially conscious entrepreneurs and individuals interested in responsible stewardship of the planet. Sustainability Now covers food, energy, housing, water, waste, health, economics, and consciousness. Welcome to your community, Sustainability Now, with your host, Mira Rubin.
Welcome, everybody, to Sustainability Now, technologies and paradigms to shape a world that works. I am so excited to share our guest with you today, Dr. Elisabet Sahtouris. Dr. Sahtouris is a world-renowned evolution biologist, futurist, speaker, author, educator, and sustainability consultant to businesses, government agencies, and organizations. She's appeared in multiple films and has made media appearances on all 5 continents. A fellow of both the World Business Academy with an honorary chair in living economies and the Findhorn Foundation in Scotland, Dr. Sahtouris is on the advisory board of multiple organizations, including Ethical Markets and Tree Sisters. She's co-founded the Worldwide Indigenous Science Network and has convened international symposia on foundations of world sciences in Japan and Malaysia. The most recent of her 5 books is Gaia's Dance: The Story of Earth and Us. I am so excited to introduce you. And before we get started, we want to give a shout out of thank you to our newest sponsors on Patreon. This is a labor of love for me and my partner in Sustainability Now, Scott Billy. And with your help and support, we are able to keep on the lights and to be growing and expanding our offerings. So our most recent thanks goes to Robert Putney of Impact Earth, Suzanne Abedi, and Mary Ross. We are so, so grateful for your support and for that of everyone else who is sharing the work and sharing their hearts. So with that, here we go. Dr. Elisabet Sahtouris, thank you so, so, so much for being here. Welcome.
A big aloha to you and to all your audience from here in Honolulu, Hawaii.
Wow. Wow. I would love to be in Honolulu right now. And thank you for making the trip. You are such a multifaceted, multi-talented influence in the world. And before we dive into so many different things that we could be speaking about, I was hoping you could give us some foundational definitions so that people have an orientation for our conversation. So you're an evolution biologist. What does that mean?
Well, I kind of call it being a deep pastist. It means, of course, studying the evolution of biological entities up to the earth itself, which I see as a living entity. And so I am a deep pastist studying that 4 billion years of Earth's life in order to be a good futurist, because knowing our past trajectory can help us see what's possible next.
That's a really brilliant and interesting concept and observation, because you're looking at nature's structures and patterns to be predicting our evolution. And I think that's really fascinating, because you're not limiting yourself to an anthropomorphic or human-centered focus. You're looking at all of biology. And I think that seems to be a really, really big movement, actually, for gaining wisdom and a way to find our way out of the mess we've gotten ourselves into in so many ways. Yes?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That's
So,
my main focus, is on our human evolution right now, because we're going through the most important transition ever.
so I think that that's a perfect segue. I just do want to mention living economies, because this is part of the evolution that you're talking about. And I'm wondering if you might be able to give us a context for what that means as well.
Yes, well, we humans, of course, have organized ourselves politically and economically, and we tend to put these things into separate boxes. Spirituality is here, and science is there, and this is for children, and this is for grown-ups. And, we like the boxing everything separately, taking things apart and looking at the individual components. But when you look at nature, you see that nature, what is economics, an economy? As far as I know, it's the acquisition of resources, their transformation for use, and then their disposition afterwards, the unused as well as the used. And if you look at nature, of course, this is what nature does all the time. Its ecosystems are constantly recycling everything, and it ends up turning into homes for species and places that they can acquire food and kinds of food they acquire and all that. And we find that nature has this circular economy where everything is always recycled beautifully, so that nothing is ever wasted. One species wastes another species' food and so on, right? And the great recyclers, of course, are everything from the condors to the microbes, constantly redoing things. So when we look at human economies, are they the same as nature's? No, our economy turns out to be linear. We take, we make, we use, and we throw. And there's no connection between what you throw away and then you extract new stuff always and make more and more garbage. So looking at that, I saw that, if you look at the words economy and ecology, you see that the ecology, both words come from the Greek word ecos, spelled in ancient Greek O-I-K-O-S when you anglicize it, right? The ecos, from which we get ecology, economy, and all those other words. The ecology is the household. The ecos means household, and the logos of the household, the logos is the pattern of how it's organized. And the economy is the household, again, with nomos, economos, right? Economy, and the nomos is the rule, the way the household is governed. And so we separate those two things as if they had nothing to do with each other. And it's a very strange thing, because what we're actually doing is our economy is exploiting our ecology for its own purposes, sees ecologies just as a set of resources for human use. And if you turn that upside down and instead fit your human economy into nature's economy, ecology rather, so that the ecology rules and the economy is subservient to it so that it doesn't destroy its own base, then you get what I call ecosophy, the household with Sophia, Sophos attached to it. The wise household is the one that does it the right way. So we have to turn that upside down. Make sense?
It does. It makes perfect sense. And it's amazing that we haven't figured that out yet. Right. But you are figuring it out, and you have such a hopeful message, really. And I think in reading some of what you provided me, you're talking about how there's a maturation cycle. There's a cycle that biology goes through. And I was wondering if maybe you could speak about that and parallel it with our development.
Yes, well, when you look at the history of Earth, its evolution, about half, let's say it's roughly 4 billion years. Half of that, 2 billion years, was only about the microbial world, the bacterial world, the viruses that the bacteria produce to store information and all that. And they went through amazing things. In fact, they were the only creatures of Earth other than humans to cause both global hunger and global pollution. And this is really, really fun to have dug this up, and see that we actually resemble our most ancient bacterial ancestors. And a wonderful essayist named Lewis Thomas once quipped that maybe we are giant taxis the bacteria built to get around in safely, because it turns out that after after the 2 billion years, half of evolution, the first nucleated cell was birthed as a cooperative of ancient bacteria. After they had been feisty and competitive for a long time and invented lots of interesting technologies up to electric motors and nuclear piles and things along the way, they finally developed these huge cooperatives where the different kinds of bacteria had different roles, and each of them gave some of their DNA up to a common nucleus that I call the library center of the information center of the cell. And then it goes on with the two kinds of cells, the smaller bacterial cells that are still independent and those who have formed the cooperatives, living side by side for another billion years, while the big nucleated cells worked out their hostilities and competition and then formed multi-celled creatures like ourselves and the tree behind me, right? So I started to see that there's this cycle that goes through a youthful, expansive economy, just like your own body. You grow up to adolescence, your cells keep dividing and get bigger and bigger, and then you level off and all your cells have to remain in a cooperative mode for the rest of your life, right? So we ourselves are the whole story of evolution is in us. And we have recently learned, of course, that 99.9% of bacteria are helpful and even essential to our own health, lining our guts, making vitamins, repairing the gut walls, getting all that stuff you cram into your mouth and making sure that only the safe parts get through and that they can contain the parts that aren't safe for you. And then our skins, of course, are also coated in these helpful bacteria. And so I worry a little bit about our mad spraying everything, wiping, spraying constantly, when the bottle tells you this is 99.9% effective, which says to me it's going to wipe out all the good guys and leave only the bad, tough guys behind. and that this is who you leave on your hands and on your cooking surfaces. So we have to make friends with the microbial world. They are us. In fact, my little cartoon book called Bacteria Are Us, made for cell phones, is also available online. And it's a lovely little 40 cartoon pictures history of how bacteria ended up forming humanity. Right?
Would we find that on Amazon, or where would we be able to pick up that?
Yeah, it is on Amazon. It's on various, Apple sells it, and a couple of other bacteria, then capital letter R, us.
Oh, how funny. That's
Yeah.
great.
Toys R Us, I use the backward R actually on it. Went out of business just as I was publishing this with
Perfect timing.
my wonderful cartoonist friend Kathy, who did the wonderful funny cartoons for me.
Oh, that's great. So you're talking about going through these phases that are competitive and destructive, and then coming to a cooperative phase. And this is very different from the Darwinian notion of competition and survival of the fittest that we've been schooled in for so long, right?
Yeah, actually the fittest are the ones that fit in the best, see, with everything around them.
Yes.
Because I still wonder, like, in a universe where anything that can happen will happen, and that's what my universe is like, what survives? What lasts? What's not so very transient? Everything is ultimately transient, but what lasts the best? And I came to the conclusion it was whatever worked out harmonious cooperative relationships with its surround, whatever its surround was within its ecosystem or whatever. Because then you have this mutual feeding each other between nature and whatever part of nature we're interest in keeping alive, in making it last. So that's where we humans are now, that we have to figure out how to make cooperative relationships instead of the hostile ones. And look at now, I mean, every day the news is about new hostilities. It's unbelievable in this day and age when so many people are waking up and longing for this cooperative world, that those still in charge of us politically and economically are still into this 6,000-year-old empire building mode that's become completely obsolete. We can't do this anymore. We have to get into growing up, getting through that adolescent crisis that we're in, to move into the stable mode for humanity.
So the big question is, how do we do that?
That's our big question.
And I suspect you have some ideas about that.
Yeah, one of my favorite metaphors is to think of yourself and your ecosystem and everything up to the whole universe as being made of vibrations. As Mira said, I did several symposia on looking at the foundational beliefs behind different sciences in the world: Western science, Vedic science, Islamic science, Taoist science, indigenous sciences. There are all these different sciences, but all of them somehow seem to agree that the universe is made of vibrations. So a keyboard can be seen as an endlessly long keyboard as the notes, the notes and the between the notes, vibration series. And if you look at as if you were sitting at a keyboard, the low keys are the matter, the lower vibrations are matter. And then you move up the keyboard, you're in the electromagnetic energy realm. And Einstein, of course, came along and showed us that the music can transpose up and down between energy and matter, because matter is energy, energy is matter, E equals mc squared. Now, Western science gets stuck at this point because one of its foundational beliefs is that what is real must be measurable with physical instruments.
And repeatable.
So even electromagnetic energy was considered stage woo-woo until we could start to measure aspects of electromagnetic energy. And now we're up to measuring 0-point energy, we call it. And we can't get beyond that, where the energy dematerializes gradually as it goes up the keyboard into the realms of consciousness and mind, matter, and mind, spirit, consciousness, right? All the way to the cosmic consciousness, in which all that is the keyboard is all that is, right? So are you. You are not a body with a mind, and energy flowing through it. You're a body, energy, mind unity. And Taoist science has exactly that matter, energy, spirit, consciousness, mind thing. And for those of you interested in UFOs, consider how people see UFOs suddenly disappearing. What is that? Well, in my opinion, what they're doing is they're dematerializing. They're moving up the keyboard. They're sliding themselves out of your range of perception so that you can't shoot them down, right? And then they are advanced enough to be able to do this, to be able to materialize and dematerialize in that way. So this is very helpful because we talk so much about how can we integrate science and spirit, matter and mind. And when you see it as this keyboard, then you realize the problem is not how to integrate them. The problem is to ask yourself, why did we ever separate them? Why did we take them apart? So that's a kind of good basis for me to talk about where we're going in the future, knowing ourselves as being body, mind, spirits, however you want to see yourself, to know that you have a deeper, permanent self in the universe, because linear time is only useful in material worlds. As soon as you dematerialize, you're going into an eternal now situation where everything is now. And yet each individual that we can perceive within the whole universal creative enterprise has a certain kind of autonomy relative to what's around it. We can distinguish ourselves from each other and from the tree and and things like that. And yet ultimately we're constantly breathing in each other's molecules and microbes and things like that.
Wow. Wow. So it brings a whole new idea to the word harmony. You know, if we're talking about a keyboard, we all get to be playing different octaves in that on that instrument. And it as you're talking about us being a body, mind, energy, spirit, it also reminds me of the living biology, and talking about the earth as a whole system of which we are part and parcel. I'm wondering if you can elaborate on that, because a lot of us understand the idea of a living earth, but we still don't necessarily see ourselves as part of it.
Yes, isn't it interesting how we have separated ourselves out from everything? This boxing, this individualizing has gone to an extreme, and yet it may have been very important for us to really get that individuation in order to weave ourselves back into community. And you know, by the way, the keyboard, of course, is about music. And isn't it interesting that we can create great dissonance with sound, and then we call it resolution when it resolves back into harmony. And harmony is exactly about not blurring the individual notes, having the individual notes, each of us, right? And yet being able to create these harmonies as well as these disharmonies. So that's what we're looking at now, is how do we get beyond this 6,000 years we've had now of empire building, top-down authority. And our history books have tended to make human history look like some fairly simplified progression where we start out as hunter-gatherers, just living within nature, taking what we can, spitting the pits, right? Which of course is the beginning of agriculture, because you then discover that your favorite food is right on the path you were walking on, right? And then we say you went from hunter-gatherers to agriculture, and then with agriculture, a lot of people now are saying that's where the problems come in, because you start fencing off land and having private property ownership, and then you move into city-states and empire building, as though this is the way of evolution. And the book I'm reading now is called The Dawn of Everything. And it's about looking back at that history and seeing how much we have projected from our current empire builder mode to see it as the peak and the hunter-gatherers as the most primitive. Now, if you look at the world today, we have still got hunter-gatherer society. The few that manage to persist in the cracks and not get wiped out by the empire builders are still there. And our cultures have very different languages and very different worldviews. Even science, you know, most people are not used to thinking about the fact that there are different sciences depending on what your fundamental beliefs about a universe are. You see, you can't make a theory in a vacuum about a universe. You have to have an idea what a universe is in order to theorize about how it works, right? So the Western scientists had one set of assumptions. It's made of matter. Later, they added in energy, and it can be observed as objectively as though you're not part of it. And all of these were fundamental beliefs. So I had these different symposia to look at what are the fundamental beliefs of science, because the quantum physicists, when they pushed through matter and got into pure energy, had no way of understanding it from the principles they had been taught as Western scientists. So they all, the founding fathers of quantum theory, all looked to Vedic science in India, which is consciousness-based, right? And on the keyboard, these Eastern sciences started at the high end of the keyboard in cosmic consciousness, deriving mind and energy and matter from them so they could see the whole keyboard, while Western science was getting stuck going up the keyboard. And this is what drove me to looking into those sciences. Okay, what did they find there? What were the fundamental features or beliefs? assumptions, axioms, whatever you call them as you formalize them in science, right, of Vedic science. And then I did one in Kuala Lumpur to look at Islamic science. Well, I now had a matter-based universe in Western science and a consciousness-based universe in Vedic science. And Islamic science, to my surprise, came up with a living universe. Surprise. Number one axiom, Allah created the universe. Number two axiom, Allah created a living universe and told us to study it. So now I had three different kinds of sciences, and I wanted to do Taoist science in China because the Taoists are all about how do you fit humans into nature. So that would be the important fourth. And then, of course, all the indigenous sciences, and which we looked at in you mentioned that I was one of the co-founders of the Worldwide Indigenous Science Network, which was founded actually and held together all this time by Apila Colorado, who lives on Maui. And anyway, I don't want to get too distracted by that. The point is that when we look at this whole big cosmic picture and we see ourselves as body, mind, spirits, and many humans have and still do believe themselves as incarnational beings who come here to learn things and to grow their own souls through the experiences of living in material worlds, and I'm very fond of that idea. As an evolution biologist, I can't tell you a very clear picture of the evolution of humans. There are still some very big gaps in there. And for all I know, we may be GMO'd large apes or something, with the aliens that come to mess around here on Earth, or, try to keep their own selves alive when they've destroyed their planet or whatever these various stories that we hear now are. And it's important to collect stories, to not feel you must know the ultimate truth, because none of us can do that. Maybe after we dematerialize again, we'll know more about the big picture. But while we're here, we are storytellers from the get-go. We live by our stories. We always have. And that's why so many people now are catching on to the importance of changing our stories in order to change our lives. And the new stories are about the cooperative world. We don't want to harm nature by living on this beautiful natural living planet. And the reason I call it a living planet is because Jim Lovelock was one of my big inspirational people, and Lynn Margulis, his partner, the microbiologist, and Maturana and Varela, the Chilean scientists, who came up with the concept of autopoiesis, also a Greek word, autopoiesis, meaning self-creation, that a living entity is one that continually creates itself. And that is what our bodies are, that's what our Earth is. So even though I think I corresponded with Varela long ago, and he had not thought of something as large as the Earth as being in that definition, but many other people did. And so it's becoming more and more acceptable to see the Earth as constantly evolving, changing. And you would see that if you could see a movie of it over time, how its colors change as the different species arise and all that. So here we are with this new task of figuring out how do we fit our economy into the ecology with an ecosophy. And when this book I started to talk about, The Dawn of Everything, it begins in a very interesting way with the conversations that took place between the European invaders, the conquerors who came in, and many of them were trappers and traders, along with the explorers, right? The conversations between Native Americans and these people who came in from Europe, because they were there long enough and intermingled long enough so that quite a few of them actually learned each other's languages. If you were a fur trader wanting to take furs from Canada to Europe, you had to intermingle with the people who were there and knew how to trap things and make fur garments, right? What it boils down to is that the the Native Americans were aghast at the behavior of these Europeans. They had no idea how these people could be so hostile, so unsharing, so grabby, so, uptight, and not even bathing very often on top of it, right? And because there were missionaries along with the traders and stuff, these missionaries sent very faithful reports back to Europe. And actually, some of the European philosophers and thinkers started taking this seriously, this critique of their own culture from this presumably primitive group of people, right? Well, it turned out that that primitive group of people, of course, had the only democracy ever to arise on Earth fully, a true democracy. And that was the democracy of the people we call the Iroquois, but that's a name that the invaders put on them. Their own name for themselves was Haudenosaunee. And I grew up in Haudenosaunee territory, the 6 nations that had united under a great law of peace, that had stopped warfare. In fact, if a man wanted to declare war in that culture, he had to walk into Parliament wearing a skirt and carrying a corn grinding bowl to remind everyone what war would do to the women and to the children and the food supply. And therefore they had no more wars for all that time. And there were lots of other interesting things about that culture. Benjamin Franklin, one of the founding fathers of the United States, and a writer of the Constitution, knew them very well and tried to get his fellow Europeans to understand that they had this incredible, as they were trying to found a constitution, that they had this incredible constitution called the Great Law of Peace. And the only thing he got them to copy was the tripartite government of checks and balances, but they left out women, children, nature, and the future. They were thinking 7 generations ahead and all this. Well, the book goes on to show how many ancient cultures had worked out cooperative modes. Even when they were at the hunter-gatherer stage, they ended up building some fairly sizable cities in very different parts of the world that had no rulers, no high up authorities that were handing down the rules, but were made of self-organizing pods of people all the way up to managing lots of people at once. And they go through the great details of how at every stage of evolution and on a timeline, humans were organizing themselves in very different ways and have long had this tradition of cooperative self-governance along with the building of the ones who wanted to rule small groups first and larger up to the major empire builders. And so when you see this, you know what a long trajectory there is with so many different branches and roots, that humans know how to organize themselves in larger groups than we thought could be truly cooperative from way back. And evolution biology has now caught up with the fact that there have only been about 6 true social species defined as species who live together by the millions in organized communities. And 4 of those, of course, are the insects, the ants, the bees, the termites, so whatever the 4th one is. And the only one between them and us, it turns out we're the 6th. The 5th is blind mole rats of all this.
So
Most people don't even know of the existence of blind mole rats because they live underground. They don't even need vision, right? But they do organize themselves by the millions cooperatively.
That's wild.
So it's kind of amusing. And yet it's a wonderful birthright we have, that we are meant to be cooperative. And how many of us are told, look how cooperative we are. We live in hives of millions of people. We drive in the lane designated. We stop at the traffic lights. We don't steal from each other. We don't knock each other over when we're walking down the sidewalk. We gather in groups. We make up music and theater and science and all these things. We have global cooperation in space as well as on the earth, and money systems can be interchanged. And, it goes on and on and on to see that we are way more cooperative than competitive. But because people aren't reminded of that, they don't think of it. They keep telling the story of, I have to get what I can while I can. Because it's all going to hell in a handbasket. That's what Western science tells you. The universe is running down by entropy and nothing can save us, so we're going to be washed out. Well, that's not necessarily true from different science perspectives, where cosmic consciousness is endlessly creative and always recycling and thinking up new ways to be. So I look forward to our future, because I believe we're such a creative species that we can handle any problem that comes along. Yes, we may be drastically reduced in numbers. We are the authors of this massive climate change. Not that the Earth didn't know how to do a hot age before, because it has had hot ages, but never during human existence. Although human existence has survived a dozen ice ages, which are about the same number of degrees cooler than what we call normal, as a hot age is hotter than what we call normal. So I do believe we can survive if we work very diligently and quickly to get rid of pollution, because the hotter it gets, the less likely you want to breathe polluted air, right? Those two things don't go well together. So whether you believe that global warming is man-made or not, it is happening. Very few people are really denying it anymore. And certainly science is hugely agreed on this. And it's not going to come in slow, incremental, a centimeter sea level rise at a time. It's going to come in fits and starts and jumps like nature's storms and floods, and, all of these things happen. And so we need to be prepared, and we need to look at how to take care of each other cooperatively. So you mentioned, again, living economies, a term that I introduced at Social Venture Network in the 90s. And it got taken up and it turned into the Business Alliance for Local Living Economies, BALLE, BALLE. And it was taken up by Dave Corton was there, and he's written a lot about it now. And I wrote one of my books in his home before he and his wife could move in from New York, then when they had bought a house up in the Pacific Northwest. And so we're all friends. Bruce Lipton and all of these scientists have worked these things out. Hazel Henderson, who's done so much with greening economies through her Ethical Markets website, where I'm also a fellow.
I want to interrupt you for 1 second, because we did a wonderful interview with Hazel Henderson. And so for those of you who are listening and are interested in learning more, please check out our website at sustainabilitynow.global. Just look up Hazel Henderson. You'll be able to see that interview. She's a remarkable woman and has been one of the first real supporters of sustainability now. So we're
absolutely. And she's the author, I think, of the global idea, of global to local, that we have to look at both the local and the global, recognizing that we live in this holarchy like onion skins of our bodies are holarchies of cells within organs, within systems, within the whole body, and then we in communities and nations and so on, ecosystems alive within each other. So these concepts are there now, and we have beautiful examples in Sri Lanka. We have the Sarvodaya movement, Sarvodaya, Sarvodaya, where 15,000 villages, little villages and hamlets, are organized together to help each other with an internal money system where people bank their pennies, knowing that while they're in the bank as pennies, they can be lent to other people to help them start to bootstrap themselves. And the little children are taught two principles. They're taught to meditate on inner peace and generosity. Just those two things. Imagine a world where everybody was peaceful and thinking constantly, what do I have to give? It's so beautiful. And then they have the urban cooperatives in Mondragon, Spain, spelled Mon, like Mayan French, M-O-N, dragon, one word, Mondragon, cooperatives, where a Catholic priest 40 or 50 years ago went around to bars, places young people hung out and said, how can we build a society that's neither capitalist nor communist, but built on loving human relationships? And over time they did it. And they built these incredible cooperatives where everyone's a co-owner of their business and no one ever goes hungry. And no one earns more than 6 times, I think, the lowest salary. So if the janitor has $50,000, then the top person can only have 300,000, so that it's not completely level playing ground, but within reason, and everyone cared for within that culture.
Wow.
We have ancient civilizations like the Incas of Peru, who did kind of paternalist socialism, where it was an empire, ruled by the Inca, but everyone was taken care of. And that's why they could bring so many people into their empire, because they allowed them to practice their own religion as long as they also practiced a state religion, and they were guaranteed food and housing and, a way of life. So we have these many different ways that humans have lived on the planet, and it's entirely up to us how we co-create our future. We get to decide. We, the people, actually do get to decide. And this is coming to such a crunch now, when we see that the truckers in Canada and that movement spreading around like the latest version of Occupy, and people rising up saying, yes, we do have the power. And we must start locally, start with building your local surviving community. How can we take care of each other through climate change? And, that's what it's all about. And we can do it. As Rumi said, there are 1,000 ways to kneel and kiss the earth. We need the gardeners, we need the scientists, we need the techies, we need everybody, the spiritual people, those who will hold the energy for it all to happen. We need everybody, the poets, the songwriters. There's a place for all of us,
I'm speechless. It was just so magnificently spoken. In listening, you were speaking of different sciences, and Western science, in its arrogance, believes that it's the only science, I'm certain. However, the conversation brought me to wonder, what is the definition of science?
I think the definition of science is it's rooted, of course, in curiosity, in this. I sometimes say I'm a cosmic snoop. I was born so curious, and it sometimes drove my kids mad. Why do you have to know how everything works? Can't you just, take some limited part of life? And I said, no, I'm a context chaser, because I see that context gives meaning. A rose is not a rose is a rose is a rose. It's a very different thing to a poet, to a lover, to a farmer, to a donkey, to a scientist, a perfume manufacturer. That's context. And then when you go to that next context of farming or poetry or whatever, you want to know what's the next context, and what's the next, and what's the next, to find out the meaning of everything. Well, that's what I think science is, that quest for understanding the world around us as we see it externally. So spirituality is the internal knowledge, the downloads that come from inside through your connecting your mind with cosmic mind, with your own soul mind, with cosmic, going up that hierarchy. And science looks at this physical world that we perceive with our 5 senses. And so the inner senses have even more scope than the outer senses. But science is kind of the work of the outer senses, I think, and spirituality, the work of the inner senses. But they're so interlocked on the keyboard that they overlap in practice as well.
Yes. So I'm wondering, what distinguishes science from philosophy? Now, you did say that it has
Yes.
to do with the
Mhm.
outer senses.
Yes.
However, the perception of those senses is very much dictated by the context, as you said, which is the philosophy. So
Yes.
how do
But
we?
science wants to verify its knowledge by exploring through experiment, right? So it actually does experiments. And like in the rainforest in Brazil, a child grows up learning to distinguish 300 different species of bees and things like that because they're such keen observers. And they also, in indigenous sciences, in Peru, for instance, they planted seeds at different altitudes and in different weather pockets to see where do they grow the best. They had the most scientific agriculture in the history of humanity. And half the world's food that's eaten today is derived from their agricultural experiments in corn, turning grass into, big corn kernels the size of dimes. and all of the nightshade family, the potatoes, the tomatoes, the eggplants, all those things came from there. And the amaranth grains came from there, which we know mostly only is the quinoa and things like that, but there's much more amaranth all over the world. So the science has been done for a long time experimentally, whereas philosophers can sit in an ivory tower and think about things and try to put together the patterns by observing and thinking about it, but not about hands-on doing experiments to verify things.
It makes me think of Einstein's thought experiments, though.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So he had the inspiration and then spent the rest of his life and other people's lives trying to prove it, right? Or
yes, right.
So,
But we still can have these very different worldviews in the different sciences. And what would be so wonderful is if like the Parliament of World Religions, which brings the world religions together, seeing that they share a common essence, if we could do that with the sciences as well, then the sciences that were like the Islamic living science could say to the Western materialist science, be careful not to poison your living system with your technology, right? Or don't over exploit it to the point where you're going to suffer.
You would think that would be obvious. You would think that would be an obvious consideration.
Yes, you would, but it isn't yet.
No, apparently not.
And our world still is run basically by empire builders who are at this last gasp of wanting to build this new great reset for us all, where everybody is on iPhones being paid by them and be getting social merits and demerits. And it's crazy. It's more controlling than our big novels of 1984 and Brave New World. This is Margaret Atwood on steroids, kind of. And yet young people now are so immersed in their world through their iPhones that they say, I have nothing to hide. I don't, I'm not worried about anybody knowing I'm willing to be transparent, but transparent to whom? And if you don't have to own anything anymore, as they tell you, because it'll all be made available as needed for you, then who is it that owns everything? And, I think the biggest mistake humans have made probably is the arrogance of one species on this planet thinking they can private property the planet itself. And there's no reason why we can't assign leases where people guarantee that they will leave this part of the earth better off than it was, and do it in equitable ways so that one person's fence doesn't mean the other person has no access. So we have to work these things out, and we've done it in so many ways already that I have no doubt that any randomly chosen group of people from any culture, or preferably from all cultures at once, could not find solutions to the problems we face. As I say, even if our population goes down through it, humanity will survive. I believe that. I believe that there are way too many good aspects, that are so worth saving, that are so important to the universe, that we can get through this. And another favorite Rumi quote, "Why do you stay in prison when the door is so wide open?"
That's beautiful. And I would be inclined to end on that. However, I have more questions. So you have such a broad view. Yeah, a really educated, long-term overview. I'm wondering, you talked about the paradigm that is driving the people that are really controlling the strings for the moment. And I'm wondering if you have a vision of how that gets transformed.
Actually, I do. I think climate change is going to interfere with their program.
In
I think
what
that
way?
in two ways. One, it could really mess up the internet. If you talk to the biggest security people in the world now, they'll say the most vulnerable human endeavor is the internet. It is subject to disruption by hacking, as well as by climate change tearing up cables that run under the ocean floor and things like that. And so but I think climate change is also going to force so many humans to scrabble for a living, to try to survive these sea level rise, these tsunamis that are coming, these things when they're not prepared with enough food and shelter at high enough ground, that it's going to be impossible to control people anymore. You won't be able to get them all to play your empire building game if they've thrown their cell phones away in order to graze a new piece of food.
So do you envision mass chaos? What kind of transition do you think that we are going to go through, that kind of violent upheaval?
Well, I think the violence in a way will go down, because people tend, in crisis situations, they get extremely cooperative. You find 99% of people cooperating, while a few looters are still breaking windows for the last whatever is behind the glass. Most of the people are sharing food, like in Japan, down to the last grain of rice with each other. This is the human instinctive, whatever you call it. We are born as social creatures, knowing none of us can survive in isolation from each other. And so we tend to band together. The worse the crises get, the more we form community. I'm sorry that we have to learn it the hard way, that way, in so many cases. But that's where it is. In the bomb shelters, people cooperated. During wars, they shared, they shared and shared and shared. And that's what it's all about. And if we live this life in that spirit of sharing, and of sharing the new story, of saying, hey, we've been misled. We're not this competitive, grabby group of people. We are these cooperators. We're manifesting it every day in our daily lives. Here we're doing it again. Now we do it through Zoom, right? When we don't have Zoom anymore, we'll do it on the ground with each other.
Yes, yes. So if there were a prescription for individual action, what do you think might be most effective and empowering?
Think about what you have to give and find out who you can give it to.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, my life is about sharing this kind of story, and I love doing it. And it no longer pays as it used to, but somehow the universe is keeping me alive. I had a wonderful 86th birthday celebration online. It was kind of a surprise party, and Hazel was there, and Bruce Lipton was there, and Elisa Gravitz, who does Green Money, was there, and Susan Davis, who started all the kin circles. And they were just, it was a magical, magical surprise, and made me realize that I'm still needed.
Oh my gosh, more than ever.
I'm about to go through another major hip replacement. I've been in chronic pain for too many years to avoid it any longer. And That's where it is. And I bless Zoom because you can be in full health from Europe.
Yes. Well, I am sure that, and actually I'm going to invite everyone who sees this or hears this to be sending healing love and energy your way for a speedy recovery and another 86 years.
Can we do those in another body, please?
There you go. It's so wonderful to see your vibrancy. You know, you're such an inspiration, and your wisdom and your knowledge and the breadth of your knowledge is just such a gift.
Thank you. Thank you, Mira. And you're a great gift too. And I love watching the expansion of your audience.
Me too. Me too. It feels like maybe, you know, it gives me hope to see that that's happening organically, to see that more and more people are really taking a committed interest in what we can do to create the thriving world that we desire and to be rewriting that story that you're speaking of.
Exactly. Perfect example of cooperation in a spirit of giving, isn't it?
and based in purpose, based in finding something that is generating joy, like that's like personally. So I personally believe that we all came here with something special to do, and it's our job. If we have a job, our job is to find and express that thing, and that thing gives us vitality and life and joy.
Yes, absolutely. You know, I have to close with a little story by the Polynesian sailors of Hawaii who were navigating the whole earth very recently in one of these rebuilt ancient canoes. And they have so many ways of navigating through crisis, through storms. How can a little hand lashed together canoe, you know, survive on oceans and get where they want to go? And they had so many ways of watching nature, not just the stars, which they knew very well, because sometimes the cloud cover is there for weeks, but they had to learn the ocean swells and the patterns of seaweed and fish and clouds forming over islands. And then they said, when all else fails, stand tall in your canoe until you can see your destination, until you can see where you are and where you want to go. Right. And who hasn't had, you know, a Hawaiian beach dream while listening to a dull lecture or something, right? We can move our consciousness. So when you feel like you're at the bottom of a well and, oh my God, things have gotten so bad, there's no more hope, rise up, move your consciousness up and keep going up till you can see more and more of Earth and what's going on here. And then just discern the patterns that you see there, the ones that are leading to no good and the ones that seem to be breaking through to the light. And knowing what your capabilities are, then you can pick out something where you can get into an existing flow and move it along further with your poetry or with your science or with your gardening or whatever is your way of giving to the earth in a happy, fulfilling mode. We can do it. That's how I get out of the darkness back into the light.
I agree. I agree. And as you said, we need all of us to be, we need the poets, we need the painters, we need the engineers, the architects, we need all of us. So, Elisabet, how can people learn more about your work? What websites or what resources might you
My
provide?
website is just my last name.com, Sahtouris.com. There's a lot of free stuff there, articles and things. And then anytime you can go on Google and find videos and all kinds of things like that. So I give away most of my writings.
And your writings are spectacular. So I invite everybody to check it out. We'll have a link to your website on our website when we post this. And I just want to say thank you so much. Thank you for all your work. And thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Mira, for having me.
So that's it for today. I also want to thank all of you who are listening. Please, if you've enjoyed this, share it widely. Check out our website at sustainabilitynow.global. And I want to thank my partner in Sustainability Now, Scott Billy. He's also our producer. And that's it for today. Until next time, live your best life, love the world around you, and together we can save the world.
Thank you for listening to Sustainability Now, solutions to shape a world that works. Visit sustainabilitynow.global for resources related to today's program. And be sure to subscribe, share, and follow us on social media.